Good evening and welcome everyone. This is Bill Brannick, Director of Technology out of the OCE. We are thrilled that you are joining us this evening for an excellent opportunity to learn, share, and grow. And as always, after the webinar, we ask that you share and connect both with our AoPTech team and with each other throughout the Archdiocese, and those teachers that connect with us throughout the nation and the world using the hashtag AoPTech. Tonight we have a great webinar on hand with Alyssa DeVito talking about integrating news media into the elementary classroom. And as we begin this evening, we will begin, as we do all good things, with a prayer. And I ask everyone to place themselves into the presence of our Lord, and together in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord God, we thank you that you promise to be with us always. We thank you for your presence is with us this evening. This evening, we give your hearts. We give us your heart, our hearts to you, our minds and our lives. Come speak your words of life into our beings. We pray that you would deepen our comprehension, broaden our thinking, and transform our understanding of what we are about to study. For you are our wise counselor, our perfect teacher, and our faithful friend. And we ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. St. John Newman, pray for us. St. Isidore, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Just a quick bit of housekeeping. Just a reminder that our webinar is being recorded this evening and will be archived on our YouTube channel. As well, tomorrow afternoon, you will be receiving a follow-up email with the archive link for the webinar, any of the resources that are shared this evening, including the presentation, and as well a follow-up survey that we would certainly ask that you fill out so that you can give us feedback on our webinar offerings and how we might be able to continuously improve them. Anyone who signed up for Act 48 credit, that Act 48 credit will be submitted to OCE separately outside of this webinar, and you can look for that on your courseware. This evening, I am thrilled once again to be able to present our featured presenter, Ms. Alyssa DeVito, who is our Associate Director of Educational Technology and Integration Coach Pre-K to 12. Alyssa serves us in Philadelphia North and Bucks County. Many of you know Alyssa from her work through the Arch over the past number of years. She is a Google Level 2 certified teacher, an Apple certified teacher, and a Common Sense Media mentor teacher. And Alyssa previously taught 7th and 8th grade ELA and social studies in the Archdiocese at St. Joseph's St. Robert School in Warrington. And this evening, just a reminder, I know you received an email earlier today, but we are having a back channel chat through Todaysmeet. And that link was in the email from earlier and also will be popped into the chat window. Please engage with us throughout the presentation tonight. Not only with us as the AoPTech team, Annabelle and Aaron will be there moderating some of the comments and some of the questions that we will be giving through Alyssa's presentation, but also just to be able to share some best practices as far as what you utilize in your own classroom and in your school community. And as well, Todaysmeet is a great opportunity to be able to integrate back channel chat into your classrooms as well. And without further ado, Alyssa, I would love to be able to hand it off to you for our presentation this evening.
All right. Hello, everyone. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Good. I did that correctly. I always get nervous. That's always the trickiest part, is starting ourselves off. I'm sure you feel that way in your classroom sometimes, too. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for taking some time to join us today to talk about news in the classroom. And this is a bit of a passion project of mine. I'm a bit of a news junkie. So this has been kind of a background topic for me all the time. So I'm really excited to get to talk to you about this today. Oops, have to click in to move my slides forward. There we go. So to start off, I want to level set a little bit here because I think this is sometimes the fear that we have when we approach news in the classroom. Particularly, I had 7th and 8th graders, so it was always a concern. And really, what we're talking about today is not a political discussion. Yes, politics are a huge part of the news, and especially in our current climate. But it's not really the background of what we're talking about today. What we're talking about is a digital literacy issue. And last month, if you had joined us in October for Aaron's review of those 8 digital literacies, this is really a follow-up to that civic and communications pillars of digital literacy for us there. So while we can certainly look at political examples for our classroom and choose them wisely. Know that today what we're sharing, particularly in the back channel chat, and my goal is not to spark a discussion of that on any kind. It's really us looking as educators at a best practice to say, how do we talk about sometimes really sensitive subjects with kids, and where can we get good resources for that? So I hope that that appeals to you since you're logged on here with us tonight. So really, to start off, why is approaching the news important in our classrooms? And a big part of that is we live in a 24/7 news culture. I have news on my phone, there's news on TV, there's news on the radio, it's on social media along the sides. I can seek out sources. So we're really inundated, even as adults, with various news sources coming at us from all different angles. In fact, I had a news source that I took off, a local news resource I took off my phone recently because they had too many push notifications for me. It was too in your face. And that's a difficult thing to decide. What's the most critical information that needs to have a push notification, and what's important but maybe can wait until a news broadcast or something of that nature. So imagine if we feel that way as adults being inundated, how do kids feel when it's kind of coming at them at all different angles? Everywhere they go, they have the opportunity to see that, and maybe don't have the opportunity to talk through or digest that information in an age-appropriate way. And that makes it really hard for them to know when everything is breaking news, everything is sensationalized, and we're trying to teach them to decipher, what's the most critical information versus other information in general. It makes it really difficult for kids to know. And we have to help students, particularly where this comes into a really big play, is helping students at the upper grade levels start to discern misinformation and bias within different pieces of news media. First graders may not be necessarily looking at that, but 7th and 8th graders, that is part of those reading standards, is to be able to discern that, and it's a huge part of the high school standards. So really, when we're talking about thinking about using news in our classroom in any content area, it's a lifelong skill. It's something that we're setting them up a good path to be great high school readers, critical readers, and then in their real lives, really taking that to heart. So most teens are getting their news from social media feeds, which may or may not be surprising to you, depending upon if you have a teenager at home or if you're with those 7th and 8th graders. They're really getting a lot of it from that. And really the danger in that is that there's really not a depth of knowledge in what they're reading. Often they're just reading a headline, and those headlines are often sensationalized, particularly when we talk about and get into fake news sites. They're often given a title that appeals to their emotional side, and that's where that clickbait kind of name comes from. It cons you into clicking them, and a lot of sites make money that way by the per click. So it's always a danger in there. So I'm going to pop, or Aaron and Annabelle are going to pop into the Todaysmeet, which if you have not jumped in, oh, and I just clicked to the Todaysmeet on my other computer because I have an array of devices in front of me right now, much like the rest of our team. I just clicked over to it and I see everyone saying hello, so I'm so glad folks have made their way to that Today's Meet. And I encourage you throughout this presentation to share and discuss with our team and each other. So do you currently address fake news in your classroom or news in general? I know that a lot of times, sometimes we hear that term fake news. I don't know if it's necessarily, I know it's making its way to 7th and 8th grade minds. Is that making its way to the younger grades? So is this something you kind of currently address, and maybe how so? How are you, starting to tackle that? I'm going to play some news music in the background and give you an opportunity to pop some responses into that chat window. All right, popping back in there, I can see some results coming in to that window there, which is great. Annabelle, can you share with us a little bit of what's going on in that back channel chat?
Yes, some very good conversations going on. There's a great variety. A lot of it incorporates digital citizenship. So I think bringing in digital citizenship into the classroom and the conversation brings up topics about current headline news. Also talking about primary and secondary sources, trying to figure out biases. And just having general conversations, trying not to get too specific, especially when we're talking in political subjects.
Awesome, thank you. I can't wait. I can see the flow happening, and I can't wait to get to read through them all myself too. Though I did just catch one that mentioned Channel 1 as a news resource there. I'm so excited. Channel 1 still is around and exists. I know it mostly from my own high school experience, but seeing that quick comment in the Today's Meet window brought back a sudden flow of memories, so I had to point that one out. So let's talk a little bit about where kids and the news stands. Common Sense Media, and I'm so happy to hear that digital citizenship might be the framework for these conversations. That's a perfect way to frame those lessons, and particularly we've had this goal across the Archdiocese to utilize Common Sense Media's digital citizenship, curriculum. That's a great way to lay some groundwork and some framework for what you're talking about. So Common Sense Media conducted a large survey in last February 2017, about the impact of news and fake news on children and teens, and particularly how teens and kids perceive the news and are impacted by the news. So I want to share some of those really interesting results with you. Because some of it was very surprising to me, and some of it was not surprising at all, and some of it really gave me some food for thought as an educator. So 48% of kids valued the news, which that was so encouraging for me to see that just about that halfway mark, they still really see the value in it. That was a huge part of my growing up, was watching the nightly news with my parents, that was dinner time. It was like a level set for everyone. And I know that maybe sometimes we've shifted away from that as a culture, and that's a great way to encourage, you know, some conversations at home, as well as to suggest let's have a family news conversation on the parent side of things. But I was a kid who really valued the news. It was a big part of my growing up. I mean, in many ways, I wish it was higher. Of course, I wish it was higher. But if I was asked to make an assumption, I probably would have assumed something lower than that. 70% of kids felt the news made them smarter. And I'm sure maybe part of that is in your classroom conversations, if there are kids who are really exposed to that news, not just in your room, but outside, so they're bringing in that background knowledge, that's going to make them feel smarter in your classroom when they're bringing in a wealth of background knowledge that maybe some of their peers don't have, you know, kind of makes them probably feel like they have a leg up on the rest of their classmates. So it really shows that there's a deep desire that we need to have kids be aware and have these conversations. And this really was the piece that started to make me sad on this. 63% of the kids surveyed felt the news made them feel angry, sad, and depressed. And that really broke my heart when I read that. It stood out to me very clearly. And I think, you know, some of that has to do with a political climate that seems to be uncertain for some kids, that may make them feel uncertain. I think we've had quite a few natural disasters recently with all the hurricanes. We've had quite a few tragedies that have faced our nation recently, and I could see why, if they don't have a way to discuss and decompress what they're maybe being inundated with, how it would easily make them feel angry, sad, and depressed. And I don't think that's what any of us as teachers want our kids to take away from it, or take away and not know how to deal with or process. And that's really, you know, part of why this is important for us as educators. 45% of tweens and 31% of teens said the news made them feel afraid. And that kind of lends itself with that last one too. And I wonder if part of the drop in teens is because they have a little bit more maturity to separate themselves from that. Maybe that's why teens feel that a little bit more. But that's disheartening to me when I read that in conjunction with that last statistic too, that it really is making them feel afraid. So, you know, if you're questioning to yourself, should I be approaching some of these topics in my classroom? You know, I think some of these statistics point out that we really need, sometimes we as the teachers, sometimes we're that support system for many of our kids. Maybe they don't have that at home, or they need some supplement to that at home. And I think that's a unique opportunity for us as teachers. 49% of kids received their news from social media. And that was a little bit scary to me. I grew up in a household, much like we watched the nightly news together. I have news junkie parents and had news junkie grandparents. So I come from a long line of people who like the news. But there was always a newspaper in our house. And I know that there's been quite a decline and consolidation of newspapers across the country. So I'd love to see them, I don't know, maybe kindergartners even need to react to what a newspaper is. Do they have that frame of reference anymore? Would be a great question, or maybe a great little experiment if you're with those primary grades. You know, do they have any experience actually looking at what a newspaper is in comparison? Because really they're getting so much of their news, and even maybe their parents are getting so much of their news from social media. And 39%, on top of that, 39% said that was their preferred news source. And they placed Facebook and YouTube at the top of that. I was a little surprised, to be honest with you, with that Facebook one, just knowing that many kids are moving away from Facebook as the adults inundate it. My nieces and nephews that fall into this age category don't have Facebook, but I know Facebook very much has a news headlines piece on the side when you log in for you there, and it really gives only a very tiny snippet. Our kids only reading that tiny snippet of information and digesting that without really having a lot of information, and that's kind of a scary piece to me there. But a lot of them are really utilizing social media as their means of getting news, which means there's a whole host of issues that go along with it. Is it possible that they're not getting reliable sources just because they're clicking on what's in front of them? So a couple things about how students perceived the news and why that's important to us as teachers. The survey did strongly note that students did pick up on those biases in news stories. Half surveyed said when they saw non-white kids on the news, it related to violence or crime. That's really hard when we talk about giving students role models that they see themselves in. If what they're seeing on news or via social media is only related to violence or crime, that's setting up a bad example, a bad precedence in their minds, and we really need to encourage them. So if you are with a student population that, you know, is, I think for all kids in general, but specifically if you have a lot of non-white students, make sure that when you're choosing news articles for them, to be mindful of some of that in there and giving them some great role models and some positive things to read about. And that really does go for all kids in general, but something to be extra aware of with some of our diverse populations. 2/3 of students felt that the news did not treat men and women equally. And I think that comes up a lot too as we talk about girls who code and really encouraging girls to step into some of those STEM fields and interests. Again, giving them some news media that takes away that perception to them. We really do try, and we have to try to reach all of our students. We have all kinds of students in our classrooms. So we really do need to be mindful of the resources that we're choosing for our kids. Finally, for fake news, and I know that fake news piece may not be coming up in the primary grades, but as you get older, that's really a term that became popular only in the past 16 months or so. We might have called it misinformation before that, and now it really has that buzz name of fake news that has really caught on. So it does filter down to those, you know, middle grades and middle school grades. So your 3 and up may hear that on the news with their parents or in the car if their parents are listening to KYW. They found that 44% of students felt like they could determine a fake story from a real one, but 31% had said they shared a story that was false or inaccurate. So, you know, their perception, and I think we sometimes see this with our students, their perception of their skills is a little bit different than their skill in practice. So it always makes me chuckle a little bit on that. But it does point out that we really do need to show them how to find those reliable resources. So it tells us that students need strong resources and skills to think critically, to read critically, and those critical reading skills will apply whether they're looking at news media, whether they're looking at infotext, whether they're reading a piece of literature, so they carry over. And we need to give our students well-rounded, diverse examples of news. So I'm going to play a quick video for you real quick, and I want you, all I'm going to say is for you to pay close attention. For the AoPTech team, if this is not coming through clearly, just give me a shout out and we'll pop the link into the Todaysmeet and the chat windows instead. But here we go.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom. I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
I was planting my petunias in the potting shed. Constable, arrest Lady Smythe. But how did you know? Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away. It's just a matter of observation. The real question is, how observant were you? Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
I was planting my petunias in the potting shed. Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
So did you catch the changes? This is actually a video from London's Department of Transportation about watching for cyclists, but I think it has a lot of applications when we're talking about news. It's really easy to miss what we're not looking for. So if we're not looking for great resources, it's easy just to pick the first thing that comes up. If we're not looking for fake news or misinformation or biases, it's easy to miss. So I think both for us as adults, it's something to be mindful of. But also, when we're talking with students, you know, it speaks to paying attention to their surroundings. Pay attention to what you're reading. Take a moment to think about what you're reading. And if you see something that seems odd, question it. Use your good research skills to follow up there. So I popped in the chat window. I just asked if you caught the changes, because I will say, quite honestly, the first time I watched this video, I did not catch a single change. Not one of them. I'm almost a little embarrassed to say that to you all. I did not catch any changes there, and that really said to me, ooh, I need to focus a little bit more. So feel free to use that with kids. It's a humorous one in there. So a couple things about what we can do here. Know that this is not just something that we're talking about here in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, or we're talking about because I have this news junkie mindset here. But this is something that educators across the country are looking at. Particularly, California is proposing a bill that would require the state to convene a committee of educators to deal with how to talk about news, fake news, and cyberbullying in a classroom. So they see it as so important and so much of an important part of what needs to be happening in their classroom that they're actually going to pull together teachers to figure out how to address this. So it's a national conversation. So how can we start talking with kids about questions? And again, feel free to edit some of these questions for the age-appropriate level. We're going to look at some resources for great news later. We're going to look at some grade-specific things momentarily. But these are some great questions that anybody, adult or student, can use to start talking about news media. And again, you can change the language to most appropriately suit the students that you have. And this is via Project Look Sharp. So who made this article? Who wrote this article? Who do you think the intended audience is for this article? Who gets paid for this? This is a great question for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade to really explore. Does somebody get paid if I click on this article? Who might benefit from this message in the article? Who might be harmed by a message in the article? So that's really starting to get to some higher level questioning there. What is left out of this message that might be important? Something that maybe your 5th or 8th graders can really start to look at. Is it only presenting one side of a situation? What could be left out of that? Would what's left out make an impact on the way I understand this story or the opinion I make based on this story? And is this a credible source, and what makes you think that? So when you're thinking about incorporating some of those current events lessons or as a part of good research habits, these questions are really a fantastic starting way for us, and really could help level set the language that you use to talk about this in your classroom. And really something that you could do, a great way to get students used to this, maybe giving them a couple different articles and talking in small groups, reading through maybe 4 or 5 articles, whether you kind of do it in stations, 1 article a station, or giving groups 3 or 4 articles with varying reliability that fall within your content area, and saying, what do you think about these? And trying to determine, have them pick out what's the best resource on this topic. These are also some general tips for any reader. These are from the News Literacy Project, which is geared towards helping teachers and helping readers discern good news. They actually have a great principal guide for this, for your classroom, that you can, and they call it for fake news detection, but it's really great questions to look at for the reliability of any type of news media that's in there. So they have a great handy checklist for that. Think about the URL. Is it an actual news source? Does it end in .co? In preparing for this, I went to some known fake news sites. So, Bill, if there comes a report back at some point that there were fishy things on my computer, you know that I was just prepping for this webinar. Use things for the upper grades like Snopes or fact checks to help them spot that fake news. Something I think we all discussed with students is checking the information on another reputable source. If you read something and it seems questionable, what should you do? Well, the first thing is, let me double check that. So getting students used to those kind of habits, that it's good to question some of these things. Let's see if we can find another reliable source. Think about if the headline is written mainly to appeal to emotions. It's a great way for journalists to loop readers in, but if the article doesn't then present anything more in depth than that, it's kind of a trigger there. Look for low quality signs, and I see this all the time in online media. Maybe it was because I was an ELA teacher and you're always looking at that grammar piece there, but it's a great thing to make kids look for. Is information in all caps? Are there significant typos? No referenced resources. And another one that's really a low quality sign, are the images that fall within the photo or to the side, are they unrelated content or advertisements? There are advertisements online, but sometimes you can tell the more clickbait ones from there. They have no relation. They're maybe not a real company, things like that you're having. And have them read the About Us section of a source. And if a site doesn't have one, that could be a big red flag. And a lot of these tips, you might level set this with students by exploring something together, but oftentimes, especially in the upper grades, we ask them to start doing some independent research, and we might guide them where to start, but then sometimes they go off on their own, they go off on tangents, they're doing that at home, and we're not there to guide their path. These are skills that they can utilize with that. So I'm going to pop the next question, or I think Aaron may have just popped that into Todaysmeet. And we're coming to some news resources in there too, and talking at individual grade levels. What challenges do you face in getting students to talk about the news? Is it that maybe they're not bringing it up, or are they coming in with questions that maybe you don't feel prepared to answer, different things like that? So what challenges are you facing in your classroom when it comes to integrating the news? So I'm going to pop that in, and I'm going to put some background news music on here, and take a second. So, Bill, I'm going to bounce this to you for a little bit of a follow-up here, because you joined us as a former building administrator too, and I know it's at the high school level, but I'm sure important nonetheless here. Did you see as a principal, did you see students affected by the news, and did it have a lot of impact on your school culture? Did you address that in any way?
Yeah, certainly, Alyssa. You know, again, being at the high school level is a little bit different. Different when dealing with the students and their understanding and their comprehension and maybe misconceptions about some things. But I think very similar to what we've seen over the past year or so with some of the you know, the perceived divides and some of the tensions that have existed from a number of different places. You know, we had to be able to look at it and approach it in different ways depending on what the situation was and how it affected the different grade levels. There were many cases where it would not affect all the students across the 4 grades in the same way, or it may be isolated to an individual grade. So certainly we would work with, you know, with our student council to be able to talk to them about the issue, but then go in and either speak with individual sections of classes or be able to pull the, you know, the entire class out themselves, you know, to address them. And to some cases, you know, it was a full school address in regards to, you know, respecting each other and respecting differences. I mean, we were certainly a diverse student population, and at that age, and I think as some have touched on in the back channel, you know, a lot of what comes through is not necessarily their knowledge. But it is the parents' belief that they overhear or they perceive and bring those beliefs into class or into the school community. And, you know, I think another piece that you mentioned earlier was also, you know, that clickbait piece where, you know, in our society today, you know, our students in many cases are perceiving a story out of a headline and drawing conclusions out of, you know, some copy in a headline and maybe some copy under an image that may be associated with it. And that's the whole story that they're pulling, as opposed to diving in and really learning and understanding about it. So it's certainly, you know, in what we're talking about with our climate today in our country, you know, it certainly is a sensitive time frame. But for many cases, like, you know, all educators deal with in their classes every day, we have to be able to look at the individual students and the individual group of students to be able to best address what is taking place at that individual time.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that perspective, because it's a perspective, kind of an oversight perspective that I don't necessarily have coming from the classroom myself, but and I think it's really important to think of it in that way. As I was scrolling through a little bit of the Today's Meet, and I love how fast it's moving there, and I can't keep up with it, so I'm just seeing little snips here and there, which is so exciting to me. I think what I see a lot popping up is that students maybe aren't interested in the news or the kind of news we want them to be interested in. This is sometimes the case there. Or that they're really just repeating, it's kind of built into taking those biases or whatnot from home. And I think that's a lot of times too why it's important for us as teachers to kind of present that middle ground and help and talk about, as part of those ELA standards and persuasive writing and forming opinions and supporting opinions. That's a big piece of what we do, and I think news can fit very nicely into that band, even though it is sometimes blurs a little bit of a line and you get a little nervous. There were times for sure that I was a little bit nervous about some of those conversations, but they were important nonetheless. I also want to make note too, because I saw it come up in there when I first popped over, know that in about 24 hours from now, you're going to get a follow-up email that will have a copy of this video that's archived on YouTube, but it'll also have a copy of this presentation itself. All the links are clickable. You'll see that I'm kind of clicking my own links in there to get to resources, so I don't have a billion tabs open, though that's always a little tricky. So you'll be able to view this and go in and click and get that news literacy project printout and any of the resources in there. So have no fear, those are coming your way. So what I want to address a little bit now, and this is always something that's hard, it's helping students deal with some of these tragedies. I think it's often hard. We've had even just recently, and I think there's not a week that goes by that there isn't something, and that's awful, and it's so hard as adults to process that and wrap our heads around. It's got to be overwhelming for our children to deal with as well. In the time that I had planned this originally for the secondary to the time I presented it to meeting with you all the following week, there have been numerous stories that I could see students coming in upset or frustrated or feeling overwhelmed about and need to decompress or need to talk about or just need better information on that's circulating. So it's awful that that's kind of where we are right now, but it also shows it's really important. So with my primary grades, and I'm talking here, our lowest probably 2 and under for those. And this is, some of these recommendations are from educators, some of them are from doctors and psychologists. It's a lot of times with those littlest ones, wait for the students to bring those national events up, because sometimes they may not have all had exposure, so it's not necessarily the grade level to jump right in and have a, did you hear about this kind of conversation? It may come up organically in some of those rooms. And if you want to bring up news more specifically, choose something that maybe won't have that reaction to them there, so that it's not something that that's a great level to have those positive stories about kids doing great things. That's a great way to talk about news with those primary grades. But if they do bring up some of those national events, focus on conversations about how they are safe. And that's something that kids at that age can really wrap their heads around. So at school, we practice for the fire drill. At school, we close our classroom door, or we make sure mom or dad pick you up. We help you get on the bus so we know you get home safely. So focus on the aspect that they're safe. Especially Fire Prevention Week was a great one when you had a lot of primary grades. I saw it on Twitter from our schools. A lot of schools had the fire department visit school. That focuses on them being safe. So something they can really wrap their head around. With those primary grades, really keep your questions open-ended. What do you know about that event? How does that make you feel? So that way you can really just provide that reassurance and comfort to them, because you really do, especially at that level, have to be mindful that they may or may not have had any exposure at home, and parents may or may not be comfortable. So it really is a fine line to walk. And lastly, a way maybe that you can approach it in your classroom through prayer, and that's always a great way when we're talking about our Catholic schools to kind of approach some of these conversations. Having them pray for those who are hurt. They understand that when they're hurt, and it may not be the same level of hurt, obviously, as people who are hurting in these events, but that's something that tangible they can can really grasp onto. And I think that some news is sometimes hard, or tragic events are hard because they don't have a specific connection to them, and they need that concrete connection at the primary grades. So focusing on we pray for those who are hurt, that might help that empathetic response that we're trying to instill in them. Elementary age kids, and I'm really looking at this as a 3 to 5, maybe that 5 goes 5 to 8, depending upon the group of kids you have, and as we all kind of adjust our lessons and language and differentiate for the maturity level of the students that we have. Read news stories together after accessing their prior knowledge, and I think that's a key piece. When I was doing some research into talking about news with kids, all of it said find out what they know first. One, it'll help you kind of determine some of those biases that may or may not be there if they're even accessing the news. And one article suggested too, listening to some radio versions of stories if the imaging that would go along with those articles online might be a bit of a trigger for some of your students if they're particularly graphic, to listen to radio versions, and you can take away a little bit of that anxiety. A lot of suggestions around the elementary age was not to overcorrect and say you're wrong, and by far we do want to, if they're spreading misinformation, correct that, but not in a way that belittles them, especially if we're finding, and I think it's evident from the conversations that we're having in the Todaysmeet, that sometimes they're not very interested. So we want to walk a fine line of giving them proper information, but not really harping into them for misinformation, using that as an opportunity to guide them to a better source. Also, not over-explaining. If they're not going super granular with their discussion of it, they're keeping it, comprehension levels, because again, this is an age where they may or may not have had exposure at home. And I hate to use the example of gun violence, but some of the upper grades may talk about the types of guns that were used as a piece of that might not be the most appropriate to bring up to them at the elementary level. If they're bringing it up, definitely address some of that in there, but maybe that's not the detail-oriented piece that you're bringing up to 3rd grade. Allow their questions to come up naturally without talking about the topic all day long. Address it if it's really something that's impacting your school culture or your classroom culture. Address it. Have some time to decompress together. A great way, maybe have them write about it, maybe draw it out, different things like that. That's something we suggested to parents in one of our parent newsletters in dealing with some of the news. Younger grades, draw about what they're feeling, having them get up and go play afterwards so they have some release of those emotions, so that way you can kind of address it, especially if it's something that's a tragic event, and move on a little bit so they have that separation, so it's not an overwhelming feeling all day. And that's sometimes what can happen with some of these tragic events, is that they feel that sense of dread on it all day long, and that's not what we want for our little ones. A great way to pray for about it, moving up kind of a level of maturity, pray for those who are suffering, pray for those people that people receive help that they need. That would be a great prayer to incorporate with all the recent hurricanes here. And I know we do all of these types of prayers on a daily basis too, but it's a great way to frame talking about news. Our middle schoolers can get even more in depth in that, and this is an age where they're really starting to formulate opinions, and maybe they're echoing some opinions from home for good or for bad on that. So it's an age we really shouldn't shy away from talking about news. And because by this age, many of them have their own phones, many of them have that social media, so they're able to access that independently from their parents, where the younger grade levels may not have that independent access. and at their fingertips. So providing them reliable sources, and we're going to talk about some reliable sources in a few moments here. Provide them those reliable sources. Don't shy away from talking. And I know sometimes for us as educators, it's really hard, and it can be, you know, uncomfortable, especially if it starts to go in a political direction where we're not intending that to go. Sometimes we have to level set and say, we're bringing it back to the center here, guys. We're looking at criteria A, B, and C. Allow students to form and appropriately express their own opinions. Middle school is such a critical age for forming and expressing opinions. Writing prompts are a great way to do so. Having them explore articles, or even if you want to get to a techie side of it, having something like a Padlet or Flipgrid that they can kind of have an opportunity to share their opinions without maybe that classroom discussion where they might feel attacked for their opinions on something, gives them an opportunity. And always when we're talking about those opinions, supporting that with information. It's what we do in persuasive writing, and that should carry over. Look at various forms of expression. Art, music, poetry are great ways for them to kind of tap into that empathy and release some of emotions there. And really, when we're talking about those middle schoolers, we can start to think about praying, and we all pray for peace and comfort, but it's a concept that they really have the maturity to kind of wrap their head around. And I would love to see, you know, students at maybe any of those grade levels write their own prayers or petitions for things as a follow-up to reading maybe a sensitive topic. They might have some great insights and might give you an idea too of a little bit of their maturity. And I think students, that's a great way for them to connect with their faith as well, or see why faith is important, and that faith can play a big part of the news there, maybe a connection that they didn't see before. So we're going to look at some strategies for addressing critical, or in developing those critical readers in the classroom, to go along with, you know, these tips, to partner with those. And these critical reading skills, again, can go along with news media, but too, we always hope that those skills transfer over content area to content area. And really, many of these things you can sub in your own content. They're not ELA specific or to that nature, so that they're limiting in any way. So feel free to choose age-appropriate articles or content-appropriate articles, or even informational text as they apply to your content level there. One of the key ways to talk about this with students in developing those critical reading skills is looking at fact versus opinion. It's such a foundational skill for so many things our kids do, and it really is a skill that can be scaffolded from the very youngest fact versus opinion to the middle grades and middle school grades, where they're really supporting those and finding resources. And then what we hope them to is leading to to have discussions about objective and subjective information and bias. So it's something along the way that you can help them build those skills. I'm really thinking of this in terms of a, you know, K-12 mindset too, where we're looking on how do we build this up over time, and that they can take the skills that they learned in 3rd and 4th grade, apply them in 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and build on them. What's an indisputable fact? What would be a colorful opinion? Have them write colorful opinions. Think from that flip side there. I would love to see the reactions, and if you're a primary grade teacher and you bring in some actual physical, tangible newspapers, I would love to see some kids' reactions to those, because, you know, I'm not actually quite sure that they have that at their disposal. Maybe they do, more so than I'm thinking, because it was something that was in my everyday growing up. But I also know I don't buy the paper every day as an adult now, so my little guy doesn't necessarily have that. So mental note to me to start doing that for our family too. And then another interesting way to take a peek at that is comparing a print article, maybe a print article in the newspaper, versus an online story about that might be a great way to have them dig a little bit deeper. If there's some differences in the format when you, or differences in the information that comes out when you change the format. Did the online have less indisputable fact and more colorful opinion? Did the newspaper jump right to the indisputable facts because it has much more of a limited space? Maybe even comparing it, I know that my nieces and nephews and my kids in 7th and 8th grade were obsessed with YouTube and watching things via YouTube. Does being in that format change the way information is presented to them? So, you know, you can start very simplistic with little ones on identifying that fact and opinion, and really develop that into the middle grades, where maybe they're fact checking with kid-friendly resources, and then middle school dives deeper into authentic resources and articles that and picking out those different pieces in there. So a great way to start that conversation. Debating, an oldie but a goodie, and I sometimes remind myself to go back to best practices that maybe I haven't utilized in a while and think, oh yeah, they're best practices for a reason. And debating, so maybe a great way to start that in the middle elementary grades and into the middle school grades are using some of those resources from the News Literacy Project and Project Look Sharp that I talked about earlier, as a way to start that conversation. In the lower grades, you can focus that on how to explain what your opinion is. And a really important skill, and if you've ever taken the look at the comments on an online news article or on social media, how to respectfully disagree with somebody. And that's a skill that I see adults really struggling with, my peers included. And so we're not providing, and I have to think to myself to be a better role model of that in general, but providing how to respectfully disagree, teaching how to comment on things like that. Then you can move that to the middle elementary, where that can be tied into your persuasive writing paragraphs. And by the time you're in middle school, you can have some of those more traditional classic debates. And a great resource for that on getting started, especially if you wanted to start a debate club, and that might be if you're finding your middle schoolers do not have much of an interest in current events, that could be a great way to tap into that. Middleschooldebate.com is a great resource. I used it a lot in kind of, it really has some resources if you're looking to do competitions in that, and I know those are geared more towards our public counterparts there for that, but I use it as a great way for a resource for finding topics and looking at how to approach it and setting up guidelines for debates. So that's middleschooldebate.com. That's a great resource for getting yourself started. One of my favorite resources for news in the classroom is Newsella. And I recently had a call with some Newsella folks, and I asked them, and they said it's their most asked question, is it pronounced Newsella or News-ELA? And it's Newsella. So I'm happy to say I have an official answer on that. I should have asked it of them a long time ago because I've said both and I've heard both out there. So Newsella is a great resource. There are features that are there for you that are free and paid, and I'm actually going to jump to Newsella to show you a little bit of that right now. So I'm already logged into my account. This is my free portion here, and when I logged in today, I had the unfortunate news of Nutella changing its recipe, sending fans to the edge. Even that would be a great headline to talk about with students, about the emotional response that might provoke there. So if you're a Nutella lover, sorry to say, I just learned via Newsella it has changed. But Newsella is a valuable resource for a lot of reasons. Informational text reading, there's Common Core aligned skills in there, leveled current events and articles. So I'm going to pop into a few things to show you here. So they have a library of articles in addition to their current events that are on there. You can kind of go back and look at them. by topic. You can jump into more specific news. I'll pop open a kid article here in a moment as an example later on. They do have some text sets that are available, so they pull together some articles and resources. They just did a unit surrounding Veterans Day, which is really interesting. And they do have some units too. Those units are particularly tied to some social studies units there. So if you're in that upper elementary and you've got European Explorers, which I know from my 7th grade experience was part of the start of 7th grade, there's a unit there for that. So what I can do as a teacher, and what I might encourage you to do, since there's a free resources and then pro that would be more of a school license, is try out the free portion first. And if you're finding that this is something really valuable to you and your school community, then approaching your administrator for something like that there. So I'm going to open up a news article. I'm going to pick a story here. Here we go. Excuse the little pop-ups here. Buzz cuts and books, kids learn in style in reading with Barber's program. So here's an article that I have for my students. Might be a great example of some positive news that's out there for your kids. And one of the most valuable things about this is that you can change the lexile level of the article. So if you're thinking about a current event or you see a new story that you want to share, but you have 2nd graders, you can see right now this one is a max grade level, reading level of grade 6 there. But you're like, I have my 2nd graders, and this would be great to share with my 2nd graders, but it might be above their comprehension. You're able to drop down that comprehension rate. Books and a haircut, it's fun. So it really changes and keeps the nature of the story the same and the facts the same, but changes the language, adapts that language to be friendly to a 2nd grade level. So Newsella really targets reading levels 2 and up for more independent reading. If you're a younger grade level, you might be able to do that. It highlights what they call power words or vocab words, because sometimes you just need to not call them vocab words for students to be interested. I learned that in the middle school grade level there. If your students aren't in Newsella with you, you can assign, if you're not just pulling it up all together on the smartboard and your students have accounts within Newsella for you, you can assign different lexile levels to different students. So really at the end of the day, they're all coming to a discussion with the same fact base, but they were all reading at their own grade level. So great for differentiation if you're looking for that in your classroom. You can assign it to your students, and now Newsella has announced just at the beginning of school year that they're partnering with Google Classroom, so it's able to push out to Google Classroom as well. And it also has some activities. Each article has activities. You can review those power words, and they ask various questions here. Whoops. And the quizzes that you take associated with them too are Common Core aligned, and you can see what the anchor is for that. So it does, over time with your students, help to identify where their needs are in terms of, is it comprehension, is it analytical thinking, things like that. So Newsella is a great resource, and if you're using Newsella in your classroom right now, I would love for you to share a little bit about your reactions and whatnot to it in the Today's Meet. It's a great resource. I loved using it in my classroom as a way to talk about all different kinds of news stories. It was a great way for me to touch some of those sensitive topics like politics or tragedy and feel more confident in doing so. And also some of those more fun articles where I'm just working with them on being better readers. So some other elementary news resources here, and some of these, yes, are paid, some of them are free, and we really want to look at some of the best quality resources that are out there. Newsomatic is an app for iOS for news. There are free and paid, again, versions of this. I still have the free version, and it still gives me the newsletter every day. So every day is a different newspaper And it has current events, it has human interest stories, and then there's a host of activities that go along with it, and they encourage students to engage with them, engage with the news, and share their thoughts about the news as well. So it's an app that's available for iOS. I think it's available for Android too, but I don't have an Android tablet to try that out on, and I know more of our schools have iPads in that regard. So it's a daily newspaper. It's aimed for kids there, and they do have some parent versions there too. Scholastic. Scholastic brings back fond memories for me as a kid, and it's still a great way to approach those news stories. I have to say, when I clicked to Scholastic News earlier, I was so excited. We are good citizens was just the headline that was on this second grade one as an example, and it made me smile. So I'm going to click on that one for a moment. And some of their news you can get online as well, in addition to the weekly reader that you can get for your classroom. And that might be a great thing if your parent association is looking for something that you might be able to bring to your parent association and say, we'd really like this for the younger grade levels as a way to talk about some of these things. Or I once had a parent ask, what can I get you for your classroom? Like, I want to donate something to your classroom. I don't want to pick books that you already have. That might be, depending upon the cost, something as well in there. Time for Kids as well is another subscription-based article. You can have different editions. There's different editions for different grade levels, but they do also have articles online. There's a great, let's see, 5 to 6 article on fact-checking. Information is available 24/7. How do you know whom to believe? That might be a great starter to talking about news if you're really not yet. So they do have some articles online in addition to the subscription. Smithsonian's Tween Tribute is all online for you there. It is a free resource that the Smithsonian puts out, and much like Newsella, you can adjust the grade level. When I change it, you can see that some of these articles are saying the same here, but it's the Lexile level, again, that changes on them. So I'll pop open an article here. Lexile level changes as you move on up, grades K to 4, a 5 to 6, a 7 to 8, and then high school. It also has the resources in Spanish as well if you're in a multicultural community there. Also has quiz questions for you. So that might be a great dabble in as well, and that's from the Smithsonian. This news resource, and I will be very transparent in, I just learned about this news source today. So I'm always looking for different things on here. Dogo News, I'm assuming is pronounced there, or is another news site for kids. Again, this is a free and paid version. When I click to teachers, is one of the first things I did. There's a free version which lets you do a lot with your own class, and you can assign your own assignments. If you were interested, there is a pro version that has pre-made assignments for you there. But looks like, you know, free might be a great place to start. I think I could see myself getting a lot out of that free version there. And it has news, current events on there. So I'm going to pick open this Lego article here. That might be a high interest article for, you know, 5th and 6th graders, all about Legos, different pieces here. And one of the very first thing I noticed was this beautiful Share on Google Classroom button. So decided to test that out, and I'll test that out live in front of you here. I'll put it into my class. I'm going to make it maybe an announcement for this one. It's going to ask for something. Read this. I'm going to post. You have posted to your class, and I'm going to pop it open, and we'll see if the magic happened here. There it is. Read this. Beautiful. So that's actually a news source, and I haven't actually dived very deeply into this. It was something that was brought to my attention by another teacher today, and I thought this is too valuable not to talk about that. So we're always looking for resources there. The Wayback Machine, and last week when I showed this on the webinar, it did take a few moments to load, so if we have to, we'll kind of loop back around for the Wayback Machine. The Wayback Machine allows you to see, browse a history of a website and see what that website looked in the past, including images. Now it's asking me if I want to contribute, so I'll back up to that later on there. Or maybe did I hit donate by accident? Beautiful. There we go. CNN was just an example in there, and I can go back in 2002, look at a snapshot, and it may take a few seconds to load, so if I need to, I'll move past then and come back to when it pops up, but it includes images, so a great way to kind of look at things over time as well. So question 3 here in our today's meet, and I've seen this happening all along here, and I'm going to ask Aaron for a report out in a few moments. I'll give you a few moments to pop in some answers. Your favorite news sources there. I've seen ReadWorks pop up, and I love that. Checking out what Google can do for you there. Some folks using different tools along with that. So pop in some of your favorite news stories that you're using, or sites that you're using with students that maybe we haven't touched upon, because there's so many out there. All right, Aaron, can you share with some of us what's getting shared out there in that today's meet?
Well, Alyssa, you know, the Newsella has just gotten a ton of love. A lot of people are really excited about signing up for Newsella or giving that a try. So I definitely want to thank you on behalf of the attendees, because that definitely was one that really seemed to be a huge hit.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the responses, there's Scholastic and Scholastic Junior are getting tons of love. I know that was one that I used in my classroom as well. And one that I haven't heard about, Girls Incorporated, that was Kay dropped that one in there. So that's definitely one that I want to take a look at. Catholic News Agency as well. And one that I really liked in my classroom, I just dropped it in there. Now this is geared from 6 to 12, so this will really be for more middle schoolers. But I really love Vocabulary This Week in Rap. The videos tended to be, I think, 2 to 3 minutes long, but it was just a great little summary of kind of the big news stories, and it was really something that I loved for just as a do now and then leading into a discussion of kind of like what's going on, what do we want to focus on, and then a lot of times I'd have the kids choose one news story that This Week in Rap talked about and then do kind of a deeper dive into it. But it looks like there's just a ton of resources in the Today's Meet chat window. I see CNN even has a student news edition in there as well. So I want to also thank all the attendees for dropping in. And then Meg just put in Newsworks as well. So a lot of really great resources in that Today's Meet chat window, and also ones in your presentation. So thank you, Alyssa.
Awesome. I'm so excited to go through that Today's Meet and like just
I know it's like just a gold mine of great stuff
with all of these sources. And I'm also going to echo the love that Aaron mentioned. Flocabulary. I love Flocabulary. Great with those middle school students. A great high interest way to get them involved. Flocabulary has a wide array of resources there. They have some that tie to poetry and literature and whatnot. It's a great tool if you are an ELA specifically, but has lots of applications, teachers. So Flocabulary is really great. And I love your idea of then picking one item and doing a deeper dive. So sometimes that's really, you know, all it takes when we talk about sometimes kids not being very interested in the news. It's us being the spark for that. I'm going to just pop back to the Wayback Machine came through. This is what CNN looked like in February of 2002. So great way to kind of look back and say, what was the news like? What was web like? What were images like? Are headlines different now? So it does take a couple moments to load, so I'm glad I didn't wait for it, or we moved on and came back. So just a last few things there, and if you're still sharing resources in there, keep sharing away, and that today's meet. So lastly, there are a couple different news outlets and whatnot and resources that talk about teaching news directly. One of those can be PBS has a lesson that's geared for 6 on up or 7 on up, depending upon the maturity and grade level of the kids that you have. And they have a specific lesson plan in there that addresses fake news. So if that's really becoming, with your middle schoolers, a key topic, that's a great lesson plan to utilize. And it has kind of everything laid out for you, from the essential question to the procedure there. It does tend to lean a little more political in this conversation, so if that's something you're concerned about, really make sure you kind of do a deep dive yourself into those resources first. Common Sense Media also has developed, much like their digital citizenship curriculum, they've also developed a news literacy toolkit for teachers, and they have it leveled for all grade levels. Some of those lessons intersect and are shared with that digital citizenship curriculum. So all my folks in the beginning who said I use that as my bridge to talk about it, you're so spot on. Like, that's such a great way. So I'm going to pop into that here, and you can see they have a couple bands, K2, 3, 5, 6, 8 on it, and they introduce it via a full lesson on fact and opinion. What role does fact and opinion have in journalism? What is newsworthy? What makes something newsworthy? That's a great question for kids. So these are 45-minute lessons. The full lesson is available to you. They are prepped lessons, and if you've used the digital citizenship lessons, you know the depth that Common Sense Media goes into for us as educators in providing a really great lesson there. And they're currently adding more to this as we go. From the time I first accessed it to now, they've added in a couple new lessons. This new Know Your Zone lesson is brand new to that middle school grade band. What are the main reasons people create and share information? So these could be great ways to dive into that conversation. They're great resources for you to pull from, whether you're teaching that full lesson as they have it planned, or you're pulling out the bits and pieces that work best for your kiddos. So with that, and addressing some of those news, and I've seen a couple things pop in to the chat window about, ooh, this connects with Google Classroom. Annabelle, maybe here's a good spot for you to tell us a little bit about what's going on with the January and February webinars.
Sounds great. Thanks, Alyssa. Well, we have a great lineup coming up in January and February. Our Winter Series webinars will be a Google Jump Start to the new year. So in January, I will be taking you through Google Drive and Docs, and I'll be going through the basic features that'll help you organize your workflow, and it'll be more of a tutorial. So I'll help you maximize productivity in and out of the classroom, and I'll go over some recent updates. And then in February, we're truly fortunate and excited to be joined by none other than Mr. Gene Carboni. So Gene will be guiding us through Google Classroom and sharing his wealth of knowledge with this G Suite app. So because these are more of tutorial based, we're going to be heading back to the 1-hour format. So for January and February, the webinars will be from 7 to 8 p.m. So if you're new to Google or you're just looking to refresh your skills, we hope you join us for that series.
Awesome, thank you. And January's registration is already up on our AoPTech.org on our website. Aaron popped that link in to the Today's Meet window there. So we hope that you join us, and when we talk about those 8 pillars of digital literacy, that might lend nicely into our own confidence piece in there. I know that was a big one, and a great place to start in digital literacy. We can be more confident in our Google use there too. So a great bridge into there, and maybe more confident in Google Classroom, so you can utilize some of these resources that have direct links to. I'm always looking for that as a way to catch up and refresh and start the new year on a great foot there. So thank you for sharing that, Annabelle. So as we wrap up here this evening, feel free, if you have any other final resources or questions for our team about news media, to pop those into the registration or into the Today's Meet, so we can take a look at those there. But with that, we've talked about a lot of different things this evening. We've talked about just some general tips that we can use as adults, as constant learners ourselves, and with our kids, about just asking general questions. We've looked at some ways to approach some of those and pray when it comes to those sensitive topics, those tragic events in our communities or in our nation, and really and finally following up with some resources that are great for news there, and some direct lesson plans as well. So really, I encourage you, if you haven't kind of made some of this news media hasn't made its way into your classroom, that you explore those resources as great ways to take a step into that. Maybe the Common Sense Media Toolkit is a great first step to building your confidence in integrating that in, and then you can move on to some of those other news resources there. But I hope you found something tonight, either in this webinar, in our presentation, or in the Today's Meet that somebody shared. I'm so happy to see the sharing in there. That really makes my day, everybody. So thank you for participating in that, and I hope you had a great evening with us here today. And so with that, I'm going to toss it back to Bill here.
Thanks, Alyssa. Sorry for that that delayed transition there. I was trying to get the control of the screen, but I'm certainly grateful for everyone, not only for your attending tonight, but certainly for your conversation in the back channel. A lot of great, not only conversation took place, but a lot of great resources that were left there. So just a reminder for you that that Today's Meet link is going to be active for about the next month. So if you want to have the opportunity and you were trying to take some notes or trying to click on some links and you have 15 tabs open on your browser that you're watching this through tonight, don't be concerned that you will have the opportunity over the next couple of weeks to be able to dive back into this Today's Meet link, to be able to go through, scroll through all of the comments and all of the resources that everyone shared. They will be there. As well, you will receive this in the follow-up email also tomorrow. As I mentioned early as we started, we really do value your feedback, and take that to heart and take an opportunity to be able to review not only what we are presenting, but how we are presenting it to you, our teachers. So that feedback form, the link is in the Today's Meet, and you will also receive that link as well in the email that you will receive tomorrow night. Just a reminder, as always, follow us at AoPTech across all the social media platforms, and as well join our Remind group. Through the office, we send all of our notifications on things that were signed that you have the opportunity to sign up for out through the elementary office. However, if you're signed up in the Remind Communications app, you may often get a sneak peek as far as what's coming. A lot of times it takes some time to get through the office out to your principals and then out to you as the teachers. But if you have that Remind Communications app, we often communicate through that a little bit ahead of time to give you a sneak peek as far as some of the things that are coming up in regards to registration and events that we have planned. And just a reminder, throughout all the social media platforms, our AoPTech website, aoptech.org website, that is a launching point for where you have the opportunity to be able to sign up not only for the webinars, but there are a lot of tremendous resources on there that have been curated by the team, and many of those that have been provided by you that we've brought together in one location. So take a look at the aoptech.org. Our website. But once again, Alyssa, I would like to thank you for all of your time and preparation that went into putting together this presentation this evening. I think it's safe to say that you certainly knocked this out of the ballpark, and by the engagement that took place on the back channel, you really stirred a lot of discussion amongst the teachers that were here. And teachers, I challenge you to take this discussion back to your schools and engage your colleagues on how your school community is addressing this topic locally. And as always, just remember that we are always here to be a help and assistance to you, whether it is virtually or face-to-face on-site. So know that we're always here as a resource for you. So, and with that, I am going to end our recording this evening, and we are formally going to end our webinar. We certainly wish all of you a very happy Thanksgiving, and given that we take the month of December off for our webinars, a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to all of you as well. We will see you again in January for our Google webinars. Take care, everyone, and have a wonderful evening.